So thank you for joining us. Dr. Edith Pomarol Clotet trained in psychiatry in Barcelona and has a PhD at the from the University of Lübeck. She spent 7 years as a researcher in the brain mapping unit at Cambridge University and was coordinator of the research unit in Benito Mini CASM for 5 years. She is currently the director of the FIDMAG Research Foundation, established by the Hermanas Hospitalarias group of hospitals. Her main research interest is in the structural and functional imaging changes found in severe mental disorders and the relationship of these to symptoms and cognition. A focus of her group is multimodal imaging and the development of new methods of functional connectivity and structural analysis. Today, she'll be talking to us about the symptoms of schizophrenia, a perspective from brain imaging. So I'll leave it to you.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. So, well, first of all, I want to say thanks for inviting me to this Douglas Neuroimaging lecture. I have to say that I was here in Montreal, I think in 2019, before COVID, if any remembers what was before COVID. And I was here with Dr. Lapage and also in Mala's lab. So I was very happy to see that you are really doing a good work. So I'm really happy to be here with you. And the idea of the talk is a bit of to share what we are doing. We are now collaborating with Malar and Lapage in a project. So it's nice that you all know a little bit more what we do in our lab. So, and especially in this day, I'll be focusing in schizophrenia and in the brain correlates of schizophrenia. So, as you all know, it has been already now a long time since some researchers like us are trying to examine all these brain abnormalities. And the main finding a long time ago was hypofrontality, hypoactivation of the frontal lobes, and came later the hyperfrontality. This was a bit more controversy because there was a lot of speculation there. And this was because maybe part of this hyperfrontality could be explained, but what was later on found that it was this failure of deactivation. So we were in the middle of that time. And we decided to do our own study in those days. So we just put in the scanner 32 schizophrenics. And while they were in the scanner, we did this task that maybe most of you know. That is the NBAC, that is an executive task. And the patient just in the scanner and see these letters that you are seeing and have to press a button when you see one after the other. So it's an easy task. If you are concentrated, you will be pressing the button now. But you will see that it will be much more challenging when you are doing the two-back. And believe me, because I was in the scanner as a control, and it really was challenging. So you have to press the button when the two-back is the same. So let's try. Let's see if you are clever people and can do it. So you should be pressing here. I give you another chance. So hopefully you also found that this one. So as you all know, what is happening in our brains, if you were trying to do it, is that you need some oxygen in that neurons that are just doing this task, and this is just catch by the resonance, and you can do these maps that all of you know. But the point of these maps were that, as you can see here, this is the healthy subjects group, you can see that there is this yellow-orange bits, that is the activation parts of the brain while you are doing the NBAC. And it's very clear here because it's completely the typical frontoparietal cognitive network. But what was challenging in those days, not so much anymore, is that there are these blue bytes around, and this is the areas that you need to deactivate while you are doing the task. So here is the healthy subjects. They are able to activate these areas that you can see here, but also you are deactivating at the same time this area that you don't need to be engaged at this moment. So what do you think we found with the schizophrenic patients? So here is it. Here is the map that we found. And as you can see just by seeing easily that patients already have two problems here. That is, they do not activate the cognitive network as the controls do, but also they do not deactivate, as you can see very well, the areas that you need to deactivate while doing the task. So here is a direct comparison of the two groups, and you really can see this hypoactivation of the frontal especially, and also this failure to deactivate, and especially in this frontal middle part of the brain. So in those days, this was new, completely new, so we were very enthusiastic because this part that patients were not able to deactivate is what in 2001, Gusner and Reichel discovered that it was called the default mode network. And why we think this is an important issue for schizophrenia? Because the default mode network, what does really this network do? So this network is what we healthy subjects or patients have engaged when we are thinking in our things, when we are rest, when we are thinking in our plans in the future, or just remembering personal events. So it's important somehow to think that if schizophrenics were doing this task and were not able to deactivate this network, somehow it was like an interfering process here. So if you understand properly this is two networks are anti-correlated. So either you are listening to me now, for instance, and you are trying to concentrate and have your cognitive network completely full engaged, or you are thinking about what you are having for, say, well, for me would be dinner, but for you, because I'm in Barcelona, but you will be lunch. Or you come back to me and you have the network, cognitive network, again engaged. So this moves these two ways, but not many people can think of a sandwich and at the same time listening to me. And what we did is, okay, we have seen that there is this failure to deactivate of the default mode network in schizophrenia, but what about if we do resting state, so patient in rest without any task? And we did this, and it was appeared again, this was a whole brain analysis, and it appeared again this abnormality in the frontal medial in the schizophrenic patients. So after that, many other studies from many other groups around the world have been doing this replication of these abnormalities in this default mode network. But we were wondering in those days, okay, we've done this study, but it was in chronic patients, in schizophrenics that were in our hospital. So what happens with the young people who has a first psychotic episode? And there will be as well this abnormality or not? And yes, here, well, I'm talking and you already have the image there, but yes, the patients had this failure to deactivate while doing the MBAC from the first episode of the psychosis. And what's even more interesting was that if we compare those patients who later on we did a follow-up became schizophrenics, because you know first episode you can be after an affective or bipolar or other illnesses, but also you can be schizophrenia. And those patients who became schizophrenics had more failure to deactivate. So that could be important maybe in the future for early diagnosis. Another question we were wondering is, okay, we have seen this failure to deactivate, but does this has any relationship with structural abnormalities? Because this is during a functional paradigm. So, and then we did this with a multimodal analysis, doing BVM and also diffusion. And what we see is, here you are, yes, again, there is a reduction of volume of these areas in schizophrenia that is quite in the same area where there were this failure to deactivate. And what about diffusion, that is more related to white matter, to the tracks that connect to this area? So yes, again, we saw that already these tracks who are going to this area, that this is the frontal medial, had already abnormalities very clear. So we wanted to go further, and we thought, okay, so if this is so clear, what about relatives of the patients? I mean, healthy subjects, but are the brothers or sisters of our patients? Will they have also these abnormalities since they don't have any clinical picture or not? So we did this study, just getting 29 brothers or sisters. And we did the study again with the MBAC. And again, we have our healthy subjects here doing the MBAC with the yellow beads. This time we changed the color with the yellow beads, the activations, and the blue ones, the disactivations. Here are the relatives, as you can see, quite similar, so healthy relatives. And then we have here our patients that, again, you can see very clear that there is this failure to activate and this failure, especially here, to deactivate. But the main and the unique difference between the three groups was here, as you can see my mouse, the D, where you can see that relatives were not able, again, to deactivate, as well as healthy subjects do, the frontal area of the default mode network. So maybe this can be an endophenotype, or we have to study further. So we moved on, and this is just this New Year's, just published, is that we wonder ourselves, okay, we have seen the full mode network, failure to deactivate in schizophrenics, failure to deactivate in first episode, failure to deactivate in relatives of schizophrenics, but what about if we do a task that activates this default mode network? And yes, as I said before, the default mode network engages in some processes, and there are some tasks that really can engage it. And this is self-focused attention tasks like autobiographical memory, envisioning the future, etc. So we choose a task that it was the autobiographical memory task. And what we did is we personalize this task. So it's like if I was asking you, okay, do you have any memory, special memory, of course, when your childhood about the school and the sitter? So some of you will be traumatized by that, some will love it, but maybe one of you was, I don't know, dress up like an angel, or maybe you're not so Catholic in Canada, so maybe you were dressed up as a cowboy or horse, I don't know. And then you have either good or bad memories, but you have a memory about it. And we also had to find some words that, of course, if I say childhood food recipe, maybe you remember that you like cakes, but maybe you don't have any special memory about it. So we had these two conditions, and we compared them, the autobiographical recalled words compared to neutral words. And yes, we saw that it's true that healthy subjects do activate this default mode network. You can see it now in red, and this is an activation. But then the question was, what will happen with the schizophrenics? With the schizophrenics, we are so used that anything we do with them, they have difficulties or abnormalities or whatever. So our hypothesis was that they were going to have a problem in activating this network. So our surprise was that no, they do activate properly the network. So this was a new finding just published to say that the full mode network fails to deactivate in patients, but they are able to engage it when they need it. So we wanted to replicate this to make sure that maybe, I don't know, neuroimaging, many of you are neuroimagers, so you need replications of the study and to have robust results. So we did another task, and this is the self-other task. We took it from the literature and we did modify it a little bit. And then what we did this time is like you were in the scanner, lying always. And then you saw like this, for instance, these pictures, and I asked you, I feel comfortable and relaxed around people, and you have to choose yes or no. So I don't know if you think, if you look at this, you think, well, I am shy, well, but I have my, I manage. So no, sometimes I'm uncomfortable. No, sometimes. So you start thinking about yourself, and this engages the default mode network. And also thinking about others. Say, what about Malar? Malar is a person of often make decisions without much thinking or not. So you think about another person, and this seems also to engage. So we do this again personalized for every person, for every subject, and we have to compare to facts. That is more like cognitive network. A decade is a period of 10 years. So I don't know how many of you will have said yes or no. I hope that is an easy question. So what happened with this? That yes, again, it really does. If you scan people while they are thinking of themselves or when they are thinking about others that they know, they do engage this default mode network areas. And what happened with our schizophrenic patients again? So yes, patients again were able to engage the default mode network. So we can say by two paradigms so far, it's also published this last year, that patients have difficulties to activate, to deactivate, desactivate, but not difficulties to engage. And about this task, we already also had another finding that we were not expecting, but I can show, is that what we saw, the only differences we saw was that there were differences between schizophrenics and controls, not in the default mode network because they are able to engage it, but in this temporal parietal junction that is typical for social cognition. So maybe by thinking of things of yourself or thinking by things of another person, that is more theory of mind, the difficulties were more in the social cognition, that patients were not able to activate this temporal parietal junction. Okay, so this was a little bit about schizophrenia in general, and in our lane in this default mode network that we were for a while like very enthusiastic about it. But then nowadays we were thinking as well, okay, this is schizophrenia, yes, and in schizophrenic patients we saw they had this problem, but what about schizophrenic patients? All of you know that it has a lot of heterogeneity. So some patients have some symptoms that others don't have. So we were talking schizophrenia in general with all these abnormalities. But what about some special symptoms that some patients, some schizophrenics have, some others not? Say, thought disorder. Some patients are not able to talk properly. They do incoherence of speech, what is called, or some patients have negative symptoms, that they have apathy, or some patients have hallucinations and others not. So we decided to try to look for each, for the brain correlates of each symptom. So we look in the literature, and there were some studies, some other groups also studying this, but there was the samples in general very small, and also there was lots of controversy. So we decided to do our own study, and we decided to study thought disorder. I don't know if you have not seen any patient with thought disorder, but it's quite striking because what you see is that they start speaking to you, say in an interview, say you are a psychologist or a psychiatrist or whatever, a friend, and the schizophrenic patient starts to talk to you, and you just don't understand what he is saying. It's not like he is explaining a symptom. It's that is like saying I have voices. It's just that he's talking to you indirectly, not because in psychiatry many things are very subjective. But in this case, this symptom is a direct and objective because you can already see that you are not understanding his speech. So what we did is, okay, so let's see, try to get some speech that we just videotape. So we had 15 minutes interview of each schizophrenic patient with the speech that we used the Rorschach, that I don't know if you know Rorschach, that is for psychoanalysis, but we just use it to try to get thought disorder because it was very difficult to explain these pictures and they got disorder while they were explaining it. And then we just did this test, that is the thought, language, and communication. So we had to see if all these patients had either derailment, incoherence, perseveration, and all these items. And then we know that these items are, in thought disorder, have especially two components: fluent disorganization and poverty of content of speech. So what is fluent disorganization? This is when you really don't understand the patient. So here, even some people talk about word salad because not even one word connects with the other. So it's completely difficult to understand the patient. But then there is another component of thought disorder that is called poverty of content. That this is a speech in schizophrenia that you understand the patient, but he explains and explains, and you, even though he's explaining things, you can see that finally the speech is very vague, diffuse, and you get like a bit lost. So I think it's a little bit mean, because if you see here Wing et al., look what he said. He said, this symptom, poverty of content, may appear to be readily recognizable in some of one's colleagues, therefore only rated when it is really pathological. So you can imagine this type of, maybe you can think of a person, I hope it's not me, and you can imagine the type of thought disorder here. Okay, so we put the people in the scanner again, the 51 patients with already knew and very well which one was thought disorder and from which component. And we did VVM, this time is structural, and we saw that mainly the reductions, volume reductions were in frontal, but also in language areas. When we try to split between the two components that we already said, the one that is really thought disorder in terms of incoherence, and the ones of our college, a little bit more vague speech, what we saw is that the fluent disorganization correlates were more related to language reduction of volume of language areas. Whereas the poverty of content of speech, the speech that is more vague, was more related to frontal areas. And this is quite meaningful and possible. And then we did the same with FIDMAG, because we thought that since when we speak, like say me now, I need to do a planification of my speech. So I'm using my executive function abilities, hopefully. So by doing the FIDMAG task, what would happen? What we will see here when we do correlations with each of the two components? So what we saw is that the ones that were completely disorganized had no correlations with the FIDMAG. But the ones who had this vague, diffuse type of speech had this hypoactivation on the frontal lobe. So patients who are not able to talk in a normal way, but they speak in this vague or diffuse, maybe they have difficulties in planification, and this maybe is due to this hypoactivation of these frontal areas. Okay, so that was for thought disorder. So we decided to move to negative symptoms. So negative symptoms, why are also very important and important to examine? Because, well, I live in Barcelona, as you know, so patients in the hospital, sometimes you can see nurses or psychiatrists trying to engage them in, say, I don't know, newspaper club, you know, discuss politics. Well, politics in Barcelona are always a bit, in Catalonia, and all these are always. So no one interested in doing that, the patients, because they have apathy, they have lack of motivation. But what they do, most of them are just sunbathing, because they are in Barcelona, so they are in the hospitals, just lying all around the parks that we have. So, and it sometimes can be really terrible, because parents want their children to do activities, and they are home, they don't want to do anything. So why is that? And also it's very important because it's really highly resistant to treatment, as you know. So what is happening with these people? Well, there are two hypotheses underlying the negative symptoms. One is that maybe it's the frontal lobe abnormality, again, because we have seen that with doing neuropsych studies, that executive tasks they were doing with an impairment. So there is this hypothesis, but also that could be a motivational hypothesis, and there was the reward system that maybe was not working there. So what we did is that we decided to do another executive task that could be a bit more ecological valid, and we use this computerized multiple element test that was developed to assess goal neglect in brain injury. So we decided to use it. We did our version of it, modifying it a bit. And the idea was that, well, you have it here. You had two conditions, and the idea is that, well, first I explain to you one condition that is easy. There are video games, and patients have to keep doing the video games they are seeing. Video games keep changing, and you just play the video that appears. But then there is the other part, that here is the important part, where is the executive part. That is that you have to tell the subject that the point, the goal of the test is that you have to do a little bit of each test. So not to keep doing just one, but to be changing. And here you have to press the button to be able to change from one video game to another video game. And the point is, as I tell you, okay, you have to do in this time, that it was each block of 48 seconds, to keep changing, and you have to do the 4 tasks if you want to do it properly. So some patients just stayed with one task because they have perseveration. But if you have not an executive function deficit, you remember that you have to keep changing, and you keep changing one game to another to be able to do the task properly. And we compare this with the automatic switching. So this has been just published as well. And what we saw is that, yes, healthy subjects were able to activate all the cognitive network, completely perfect. Patients did as well, but not as good as the healthy subjects. So patients, while doing this executive task, had difficulty in activate the cognitive network. And again, we can see in patients that there was a hypoactivation of frontoparietal areas while doing this task. But we were interested in negative symptoms. So what happens within schizophrenics? And again, we compare absence of negative symptoms with high with highly record negative symptoms, and we saw that yes, that while doing this executive task, patients who had high level of negative symptoms were not able to activate the frontal lobes properly and also parietal. So they had a hypoactivation of the cognitive network, especially frontal. We did a correlation with 91 subjects. We put this last year, before COVID, 91 subjects in the scanner doing this CMET. And yes, we could see that there was this correlation in the frontal lobe, especially but also parietal. So underlying negative symptoms seems to be a problem in the activation of the frontal lobe and parietal lobe. So we wanted to see if the motivational hypothesis was also right, and it had something to do with these negative symptoms. So, as you know, there is this reward system that even rats can know how to use it. And we did this reinforcement learning task. In this task, you have to choose one stimulus that most of the time you have a reward of euros. Here you would have dollars, but here we have euros. So patients, controls and patients easily learn to know which of the stimulus are more related to a reward. And here is the what we got. So both control subjects and schizophrenic patients both do activate the ventral striatum, that is the typical area for reward system, plus many other areas, especially also cognitive network areas. But what is the difference between them? And for our surprise, because we really expected the ventral striatum differences, but no, there were only differences in these areas, and especially with negative symptoms that we also thought maybe there was going to be a ventral striatum hypoactivation. No, we saw here very well that they activate very well the ventral striatum. So for our surprise as well, the only difference with negative symptoms is that those patients, both in group differences with high negative symptoms versus low negative symptoms or absent negative symptoms, and also with a correlation, in both there was more related to frontal areas and parietal, so more related again to the cognitive network and especially the frontal. So we can say that schizophrenic patients who have negative symptoms seem to be more related to a hypoactivation of the frontal and parietal areas that maybe are responsible for these negative symptoms. So we moved again to another symptom because we were very interested in auditory hallucinations, and we were looking a bit in the literature. And we saw that most of the studies, both VBM, I mean structural or functional, always were talking about superior temporal cortex, auditory cortex. So we thought, okay, let's have a look at that. So we did again a new task. I really like this task. And this task is, we were using a classical task that is called, I don't know if you know it, symptom capture. So the point here is, but we did a modified version that I'm going to try to explain. So you put the patient with we had to use patients to put them in the scanner who had lots of auditory hallucinations, I mean constantly, because they had to have hallucinations while they were in the scanner. So we were just choosing them for having constant hallucinations. And then what we did is, before going to the scanner, we asked them which were these hallucinations. So they had to to tell us the exactly words they were hearing in their brains. And to be honest, I am a psychiatrist, and as you can see, I am quite a long time psychiatrist, and I've seen lots of patients, so I know very well how terrible for them are to hear hallucinations, and they are bad. But in this study that I never did before, we had to write down the exactly words of these voices, and they are terrible. They were all the time like, you are a bad person, you have to kill everyone, you are horrible. So to be honest, and this is constant. This patient had it constantly. So what we did is we record these voices, and while the patient was in the scanner, either a researcher man or a researcher woman, depending the patient said if what the voice they were hearing was a man or a woman, we were saying in the scanner with the headphones, we were saying to him his own hallucinations. So not very nice. We were saying, you are horrible, or whatever the hallucination they had. And then we tell them to press the button every time they hear us saying their hallucination, repeating their hallucination. So here they did, we said, I don't know, sometimes they were nice voices, so let's try it with a nice voice. You are lovely. So they pressed the button, whatever, yeah. And then we also told them that meanwhile, if they were hearing a voice from themselves, because they could, even though the content was the same, they could differentiate, they had to press another button. And this is what they did. So we had here pressing the button when they hear our own voice, and they had to press the button when they were hearing their own voice. So what do you think is going to come out here? So here is what comes. So patients, when they were hearing ourselves with their voices, they had an activation, especially of the auditory cortex, as you can see, both sides. But what happens when they were just hearing their voices? Any idea? So yes, they also had activations, very clear activations. But to see it more clearly here are the real auditory stimuli over voice, the researcher voice. And here are the hallucinations when no one is speaking. So they have these activations. And what you can see is that there is an overlapping, an important overlapping, but especially in language areas. Since these auditory hallucinations, most of them are words and things, I suppose that that's why there is an activation of the language area of the patients. But as you can see, this auditory cortex that most studies were saying that it was going to be, that it was activated, in our patient, it didn't appear. So
we have a question from Malar.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, if you want to finish the slide, and then I can ask after the slide, if that's better.
Well, the point is just that because we were so surprised that we were hearing always that what was underlying auditory hallucination was more superotemporal, auditory cortex, and it didn't come out at all. It came out language areas and other areas. So what we did is to do an anatomical region of interest of the Herschel gyrus, that is auditory cortex, and to see what was happening in our patients while they were listening these voices. And as you can see, our patients, when they hear the audios, yes, they activate the auditory cortex. But when they hear their own voices, they do not activate the auditory cortex. And here is the temporal series that you can see very well the difference. But what happens when we do anatomical regions of interest of the language areas? Then yes, patients activate at the same level like the audios. So while they're hearing their own voice, they are really activating. So maybe not hearing because it's not auditory cortex, but they are really having the perception of language with words there. because they are doing this activation in the same degree. So yeah. So Malad, finish there.
That's really fascinating. Just one quick question: is there some sort of positive control here, where it's just some sort of auditory stimulus that you provide, and did you think about using that as a contrast? So something non-hallucinate, because I mean, the real auditory stimuli are their own hallucinations being read back to them, right? And then the auditory hallucinations are their own. Is there something that's that doesn't have the hallucination content that you thought about using as a positive control as well?
No, not in this task.
Okay.
In this task, we only had two conditions. One, as you said, the person just repeating out loud the voices of the patient, and the patient having their own voices. We did another task that I have not added in this talk to make it a bit more short, that is called a speech perception task. And in that task, yes, we have different conditions also with hallucinators, because we were so sure, because the literature was saying it's a auditory problem, So we did this speech perception task. And in that task that I maybe I have it back. In that task, you hear words, you hear sentences, and you hear a reverse speech, And these three stimulus, and we were comparing with hallucinators and non-hallucinators. And again, the point is that there were no difference at all. So hallucinators had not any difference in auditory cortex with any of the different stimuli. That in that task there were no any hallucinator content, because it was words, sentences, But they were activating exactly the same like non-hallucinators. So there was no auditory cortex, because we thought maybe, our speculation, maybe because they are listening hallucinations, there will be a competitive stuff going on there, and then they will have hypoactivation of the auditory cortex while they are listening words, But no. So in both paradigms are telling us that it seems there is no any auditory cortex abnormality, but more language component. Because yes, look, I remember sometimes psychiatrists say, "Oh, maybe he's inventing that," and I was like, "Poor person, how is he going to invent?" To say why, and here we have the proof. Look, this brain, is really activating while he's having the voice. So, but especially in this, that we were also surprised in these language areas plus other areas, but not so much in these typical auditory cortex areas.
So, just the contrast here, is that relative to the real auditory stimulus, or is this relative to rest?
Here, no,
Is it relative to kind of like what is the contrast you're showing for the auditory hallucinations? It's between obviously the experience of the auditory hallucination versus the nothing, basically, or
No, it's event related. So it's just capturing in that precise moment the signal in that moment. It's not a block design. The speech perception task was a block design where you compared words versus sentences, word versus rehearsal, but in here it was just event related.
Okay.
Because we were capturing the moment the patient said, I hear a voice, and then we were just capturing those precise moments. Okay, so we moved to our last symptom we have studied so far, that they are delusions. So, you know only too well, even if you are not a psychiatrist, even if you are a physicist or whatever, because there are so many, you are such a multidisciplinary team here, but everyone knows that patients with schizophrenia have delusions, and especially, again, they are not really nice delusions. Patients in general feel that people look at them when they stare at them, or they feel that maybe the KGB is following them, or even UFOs, and all this. So we did a paradigm that now here is static, and I didn't dare to put a video because I always get something wrong, but this is a paradigm that is a virtual reality, metro task. So it seems that you are in the metro of Barcelona, that is always very crowded, and with we are all very weird people. So you get in the metro, and then you see these people that is called avatars, that they look at you, and then they talk to each other, and then they just stare at you. So not very pleasant, really. And then they just arrive to the station, the people go out, and then there is another condition, that there are no people to do the, as you said, Malar, the contrast. And then we put these screens that you see here to have something in the metro, but not to have faces. Well, you know what is a baseline. And then when we did the analysis, and to see if people had this, when you do this task, even healthy subjects really feel like they stare at them, and it's a bit uncomfortable. So what we saw is this. Patients with delusions do activate these areas, and patients without delusions. But the point here is what, again, it was not what we expected, because we thought to find more frontal medial abnormality with delusions. But no, in this case, we found again that there was a hypoactivation in this temporal junction bilateral, that this is nice in imaging, hypoactivation. So patients deluded had this hypoactivation in this temporoparietal junction, that is the area that we already saw before, that is more related to social cognition component. So maybe because the type of task, maybe because these were patients with paranoia type delusions, so the hypoactivation was in this region. And it's true, because what we did is, as well, with 79 patients, we asked those patients how they felt when they went out of the scanner, of course, how they felt while they were doing the task. So some patients said, I couldn't bother, while they were some avatars just doing silly things around, but who cares? But other patients said, it was horrible. They really made me feel very bad, anxious, because they were looking at me and whatever. So the point here was that we did a correlation, so with how they feel with a test, yeah? And the point again was that the higher self-reference the patients were, less activation again in this temporal junction area. So maybe, there is this social component there in these deluded patients that is related to this. So finally, why all these paradigms? Why to bother to try to look all this abnormality in each symptom and everything? So our point is that we think, of course, to learn more about the schizophrenia, to add knowledge, but especially because we think that if we really are able to determine for each symptom which area, not only for schizophrenia, but for each symptom, maybe we will be able to know these targets, these dianas, where treatments can address, and maybe we can do just finally some progress in the therapy of these patients. For instance, there is this deep brain stimulation that we did a study here in Barcelona, the first study in schizophrenia, and we really had to decide where to put the electrode, because of course in Parkinson or even depression or OCD, but in schizophrenia was the first study. So we were debating where, and so we decided, because it was the schizophrenic patients in general, we decided to put it in two places, in the nucleus accumbens and in this area of the deformed network that I was explaining at the beginning of the talk. And the truth is that the trial went very well. We really think there is a potential here because patients, some of the patients really that was really treatment resistant had a response. So here is an open field for some improvement for these patients. So it's just to say that it's so important that you, in your lab or any lab, just try to find out where these brain correlates are abnormal in schizophrenia and in these symptoms, just to try to find this Diana, to be able to add these electrodes or other treatment, drugs, whatever you think can work, and just give a better life to these patients. And here, thank you for listening so nicely, and also to this bunch of people here that is our lab for just doing all the work. And that's it. If you have any questions?
Thanks very much. Do we have any questions?
I don't know if it was clear or it was so disordered myself.
What did you
Go ahead.
sorry. Go ahead, Katie. I already asked the question. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is not really a content-related question, but it was just kind of struck me with your hallucinations and delusions research. How do the patients handle this in a sense, because you're almost kind of inducing these symptoms, and so I'm wondering, how they handle that, and if they find it difficult.
Yeah. To me, I also felt a little bit like, oh my God, because they already have their own trouble and you are just pushing there for their benefit, of course. But yeah, well, with the voices, that they are terrible voices, I even thought it was even worse, But the point is that the reality is that they are hearing these voices all the time. So it's not like suddenly you are remembering them having these voices, So it's just like it's part of their lives. So they didn't really get any anxious extra at all. So I was surprised, but of course it's just because for us it's difficult to believe how they are living all the time with the voices. So then it was not a big deal for them. I was surprised about this. Yes. And with the delusions, pardon?
Oh yeah, I was just going to say for hallucinations, I guess that makes sense because you really target it to their own hallucinations. So it's not like they were hearing additional.
Exactly. Yeah. And patients, to be honest, they are so nice. They are there to help, and they don't complain. And also this. I didn't even see they were more anxious. But as I said, it's because they are constantly having this. Some people say they put music to try to not to hear so much the voice, or they try to relax. But in general, it's all the time they were hearing these voices. So it was not an extra bad situation because they are so used. And in the delusional part, it was funny because healthy subjects were more like, oh God, why you put me there and make me feel bad, But so I was, healthy subjects are always more what is the name? Claustrophobics, or complains more about the task, that they also felt sometimes like a bit paranoid. Hey, you're going to make me feel paranoid, But patients didn't really complain. They just said in the test we did after that yes, they felt a little bit paranoid or whatever, but you didn't see much anxiety going on there. So I was surprised like you, Katy. But of course they live with this. It's like they are used to. And yeah, that's why we need to do something for them. Difficult
Other
diet.
questions? Malar, did you have something else to add?
Yeah, I just wondering. I think you mentioned it at the end, but what was the DBS target that you used in the treatment-resistant population?
Yeah, we did a study that we need to get schizophrenic patients who had all type of treatments and they were completely resistant to anything. And they also were obliged to have had clozapine to make sure that they were resistant.
Right. But I was wondering but where is the, like, where are you stimulating?
Oh, where I was stimulating, sorry. So here, we were stimulating in the nuclear. It was a trial of 8 subjects, so it's really a pilot study. And 4 subjects were stimulating in the nucleocumbents due to dopamine and all this in schizophrenia. And then 4 were just in this part of the subgenual anterocingulate. That was this part that I have been explaining about the default mode network failure to deactivate. And that's why, because we did the study and we saw this failure to deactivate so clear, we decided to add an electrode here. Yep. And the results are that most of the patients in both groups had a positive result. So we cannot say which target is better so far. We did a crossover as well. Only 4 of the patients were able to do the crossover. And when we switched it off, the electrode, they got worse. So, and they were, of course, blind. So it seems that really this is doing something. And
is the efficacy immediate in that group, or is it, does it take some time for it to be effective in that group?
Yeah,
I know in depression, in the treatment-resistant depression literature, it seems like it might take a couple of weeks before the actual antidepressant effect takes on, right? So is that the same here, or is it immediate?
The point is that for the subgenual anterocingulate part, it seems to work much later. So the nucleoaccumbens, the response was earlier, yes, but with the subgenual anterocingulate, it take more time. Okay. And the point is that we are not so sure, but the feeling is that negative symptoms were getting better with this part here, with the electrode here, even though it took much longer to get the response.
Yeah. Very interesting. Thank you.
And I was surprised because there was one patient who we had to take off the trial because he had a complication, Well, I'm a psychiatrist, so surgeons were saying, this is so easy, we do it all the time, there is no problems, but I was like, And then one patient had a problem and we had to check out the electrode, but I went to visit the patient because I felt a bit sorry for him. And the patient told me, look, don't worry, because I've been 4 months without hallucinations. So even though I have had complications and whatever, electrodes had to be out and everything, I was 4 months without that. I've not been for a long, long time. So
even there might be a lesion effect as well, then, right? Like in the old, there might be some sort of lesion effect there if you anecdotally, right? That's interesting. Thanks so much. Really interesting stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there maybe one final question as we're just reaching time or over time?
Can I have a question?
Go ahead.
Hello?
Hello, can I have a question?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. It's excellent talks. Very interesting. I have a very naive question in terms of your deep brain stimulation. I know there's another, the non-invasive or deep brain stimulation method like transcranial magnetic stimulation. So, do you have any comments? Or why you using this, the surgery method, not the other one?
Yeah. Yeah, we're interested in that, but so far the efficiency is not so clear in schizophrenia. And to be honest, we have not tried. So, but that would be really nice because that would be non-invasive. So, if it really with the transcranial, what happens sometimes is that it just covers the cortical areas, but it's difficult to get like deep in the brain, where sometimes symptoms seem to be, the abnormalities seem to be more clear. So maybe it's this, but the point is that still is not clear that there is this effectiveness. So we would be really happy. So I think studies should be done in that line because, yeah, that could be a non-invasive way to put it in the precise area, whatever the symptom, be, personalized and non-invasive. So that could be a really good thing. We need to get it that the stimulation gets farther down to probably, but yeah, it's a very good option, I think.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. If that's it, then we'll leave it at that. But I'd like to thank our speaker again, and hopefully we can see you in person very soon.